Welcome to another episode of Long Distance Short, GiftBasketsOverseas.com's podcast where we talk to real people about the triumphs and tribulations in all kinds of long-distance relationships. Your host is Allie Winters, an international gift consultant who's found success in her own long-distance romances and friendships. And here's today's topic, long-distance relationships from a male perspective. Our guest is Dillon Mitchell of Cowabunga Studios, here to tell us about his life with his love Lauren and his personal experience with a successful long-distance relationship. Let's jump right in, Allie.
Hello to our loyal listeners of Long Distance Short, your long-distance relationship podcast. This is Allie, your host, and today our guest is the hero of our times, Dillon, who had experienced a long-distance relationship, whose relationship has finished in a marriage. So how are you, Dillon? How are you today?
Doing really well. Considering everything that's going on, life is still going really well.
That's good. So, it has always been interesting for me to know about the man's perspective of relationship and the long distance relationship particularly. For you, is it something different from usual relationship or something that is kind of different and requires some additional effort or emotional effort?
Yeah, for me, having a long distance relationship versus, one where the person lived in the same city, there were, considerable differences between the two. And the emotional piece, I think in some regards, I talked maybe more when I was in a long distance relationship than for someone in the same city. Just you had to, it's not like you could wait for that evening, to have the conversation. So in the long distance relationship, I think the level of communication was just higher. We were texting or, on phone calls, and just longer interactions are more frequent through the day than something in person. So I think that was a big benefit in that side of long distance relationships. Obviously the physical part is not quite there, but I think emotional connection for me anyway was just greater because of the frequency of communication.
Interesting.
So I was in Indiana and Indianapolis, which is in the middle of the country, and she was in California. So 2,000 miles, like a good plane ride away.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start from the beginning. Like, how did you meet? Did you meet online or offline? How did it happen?
Yeah, we actually met at a friend's wedding. She was the maid of honor, and I was just a friend that came to the wedding. And probably one of the big things that stood out, and I did get permission from the bride to wear these, but I wore bright red pants to the wedding.
Yeah, memorable thing, I guess. So that's how it started, yeah? Did you proceed with dating, let's say, offline, or you had to like split apart at once?
Yeah, so I mean the wedding that weekend, we spent some time together, and then the next morning went back to, there was a whole bunch of us, a group of us that did breakfast the next morning, since we were all kind of friends or in that group, and kept talking. And then really the next week, I was back in Indiana, she was back in California for the wedding that was in Michigan, and kind of we just started talking, and it kind of blossomed from there, right? I went from just texts and just having conversations, and really we didn't start dating for the next 6 months. I mean, we were talking regularly and daily, but I don't think either of us made like a full commitment for, another 6 months.
But it was voluntary for both of you, right? That you would be talking online. So there will be long distance relationship. Both of you were totally okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think to ultimately make it happen, we knew that somebody needed to move, but for the time being and with our work situations, that we were okay with what it was.
Okay, this is clear.
From the wedding, even through that, we'd gone on some other dates. She was in a sorority, so she had some other weddings to attend, and I went with her as her date. That summer, And then probably about once a month for, the 2-3 years that we were long distance, or for the first 2 years anyway, we were doing once a month on average was about what we met up in, real life, whether that was at a wedding or I do long distance events. So she came and saw me do Ironman and Lake Tahoe, or a couple other big type of events. So, whether it was a spontaneous trip to Dallas or, her coming to Indianapolis or me coming to California, we about once a month.
Once a month. Okay. All right. You mentioned that you've talked a lot, right? So were there any daily rituals that helped you to be in touch? Like maybe how many hours did you spend together a day?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And for me at the time and some of her schedules, it depended. We definitely, talked about various things like throughout the day. So it was always texting. We didn't necessarily do phone calls all the time since she was working nights at times for her job, and I was just working really long hours. And not to mention, like 3 hours isn't like a terrible time difference. But if you're working fairly late, it can be kind of hard to make that time difference. If we didn't text like that day, something was wrong,
Yeah, yeah, I totally understand. It's very important to keep the communication and at least to write a line like, "Hey, I'm okay. Yeah, let's talk a bit later." Yeah, we've been to that too. How your closest people reacted. So your relatives, friends, maybe, because I know that you've been in a long distance relationship for 5 years, right? You mentioned that before. 5 years ago, I mean, back then, I wouldn't say that people were prepared for that too much. So especially our parents, because they are more conservative about it.
Well, with her friends, they knew who I was, and I've been friends with them kind of throughout. So we both knew each other. So for her friends, that I don't think was a big deal. I think the concern, if any, on our parents' side was just, how are you going to make this work, right? How are you going to ultimately make it happen? And for the longest time, we didn't know how that was going to happen. I finally moved 2 years ago. So of the 5 years we've been together, 3 were distance. But yeah, so I think once I finally moved out here, then everybody kind of understood. But it took 3 years to to get to that point. I think everybody knew that we were dating and knew that we were in it. There probably was some questions along the way. Just how are you going to ultimately make this work?
What did you answer?
I don't think they ever said it. There was just, that question kind of lingered. It's one of those like unspoken questions. I think
so they were a bit skeptical about it. That's what you say?
I wouldn't say skeptical. Just, if you're happy, great. But it's just still ultimately how you going to make it work, right? Is still that lingering question. Like you guys are great together, but you still got to figure out the distance part.
And, this is the question that I was also asked a lot. And you ask yourself and maybe your partner. So was there something that you had to agree on? The future plans, the frequency of meeting each other, something like that?
Yeah, as far as like the relationship went, we didn't necessarily have a set, we need to do something every month. It just kind of worked out that way. So,
okay.
That wasn't too big of a deal. I mean, obviously, if we went 4, 5, 6 weeks, it was kind of like you get itchy feet. Like, okay, we need to hop on a plane or somebody needs to do something. So that was probably one of them, that we agreed upon. The other thing for us that I don't think future plans was necessarily one of them. We'll kind of figure it out along the way. And that was there was some pain there for, what we agreed upon and how we went forward, mainly in like careers, since I had a really good career and she had a really good job too, that she was really happy with. So in our separate localities and then trying to find something else near each other became, problematic.
But you have like different jobs, you're good about that. So I guess there should be some things that you didn't agree upon, and maybe that could affect the relationship and the consequences it could bring.
Yeah, I mean, we agreed on like the big things where, like it was just that we couldn't, and what caused the break for us was that we couldn't kind of figure our jobs. So she's a geologist, lives here in the mountains of California. And, you can't really up and move a mine. You can't shift that across the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm an engineer and design buildings, all that kind of stuff for big commercial buildings, and in a rural area, there's really not much of, big commercial like skyscrapers or schools going up on a regular basis. So for what I was doing, didn't really translate to where she lived, and what she was doing didn't translate to where I lived. And ultimately this, about little over 2 years in, became, a big problem with us. And since we couldn't ultimately get that resolved or find a way to get that resolved, that did cause a break in our relationship.
Okay, so basically that was the cause of your break. And for how long was it?
It was for 8 months.
Quite a long time.
Yeah, it was one of those where we both needed to, and really for me, to try to see, if you could make something else work, right? And we each kind of did that in our own ways. I dated some other people and just ultimately realized that they weren't who I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. They weren't going to support me in what I was trying to do. And, she was the one. So 8 months, we reconciled.
Yeah.
And started dating long distance again for another 8 months before I ultimately quit my job and moved to California.
Okay.
The biggest thing that I can say, and really the reason that we got back together, is I did a lot of exercise in the mornings, had a buddy that I would go and run with or swim or lift weights, all that kind of good stuff. And we do it fairly early in the morning, 6:30. And then I would, after that, it may have been I had a lot of anxiety kind of within me, but I'd start to meditate in the mornings, just sit in my car and for 5 minutes using an app like Headspace to kind of guide me through it, since I didn't really know what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe 4 or 5 months into the breakup, maybe 6, I couldn't stop like thinking about her and how, I was seeing some other girl at the time, but my thoughts really came back to Lauren. And that's really when I just kind of knew that, all right, if I'm thinking about that in my kind of subconscious mind, that, it's meant to be. So that kind of started me down the path of, do I see this other person really being in my life forever? Do I see them giving me the support and love and affection that I need or want in ways that I want it? Do I see them changing to be a supportive figure in my life? And ultimately that answer was no for this other person. So, started down the road of, okay, well, kind of once you know that, you get a few things in order, make the break with them, and then follow back up to, hey, like I'm done. I'm ready to be back with you. Right. So there's no overlap necessarily in the two. And that was probably for me, one of the biggest things in getting back together was I just couldn't see my life without Lauren, even when I was dating somebody else. So there was no like behind the back or no texting or anything like that. It was just, okay, I've made my decision, and now let me, make the transition to be fair to both parties, really.
Yeah, but that's well, you need to be strong, right? To admit it, to just say it out loud to yourself, to your partner. So I do really respect this, honestly. And I guess your partner also thought, Lauren also thought the same. Basically, I guess you've come to the common conclusion at the end of the day.
Yep. Yeah. It was, once we started having the conversation, I think she was dating somebody at the time, and she broke it pretty quickly once, I was like, hey, I want to be back with you.
That means a lot.
Yep.
So I guess this break only kind of strengthened your relationship. Was it so?
Yeah, ultimately it did. During it, it was definitely hard at times for each of us after we've talked about it. Now here, 2 years later, that it was really what showed both of us that, we're better together than we are apart.
Yeah. And now, a few words for our sponsors.
What's the best way to send beautiful bouquets and luxurious romantic gifts around the globe fast? Today's sponsor, RussianFlora.com. With thousands of flowers and gifts to choose from, and the best round-the-clock service in the world, as well as protection from scams when you order, the choice is clear for international flower delivery. Send your emotions over the oceans with RussianFlora.com.
And since you've been in long distance for like 5 years, right? Did you have any problems with trust, or maybe you were jealous sometimes or something like that? Was that something that you were struggling with? Because I know that a lot of couples were struggling with this.
Yeah, I mean, maybe in the beginning before we, formalized anything, but, at that point we weren't formal or really together. And to me, it was, hey, if we're going to be together, then this is what it is. And if I'm jealous or find, some untrustworthy things, then it's not meant to be. If you become kind of always on edge, then you're not fully in the relationship. So I don't think we either really had too many problems with trust. Our track records were pretty good on that side of things. So we were always fairly trusting, and just if you got problems, say something. And I probably took a little longer to say something at times than she did, but for the most part, we didn't have too many struggles along the way. It was ultimately just reconciling that, we want to be together, and how do we make this happen and still, make a living?
Yeah, sure. And did you have any rules, maybe? For example, me in my relationship, we had the rule like we should always say the truth to each other, like no matter what. And probably that's how it helped and how we gained trust. Maybe you had something similar?
That is a really good rule. Sometimes that's obviously harder than it sounds to say.
Yeah, certainly.
Say the ultimate truth. And I don't know if we had any rules or that was completely spoken. It was, that what you said is great, to speak the truth. And I think for the most part, we were able to do that and just say what was on our minds. Sometimes it maybe took a couple of drinks to get it out of you, but for the most part, it played out pretty well.
Okay. Well, I'm actually very happy that it turned out to be a really successful relationship, because, a lot of people had tried, maybe they didn't succeed for some reason. But yeah, it's totally great. And since you had the experience in that and you know what it is, maybe you have some advice for the other couples in similar relationships, just for them to feel support, for them to have some knowledge and expertise.
Sure. Yeah. The biggest thing I could say is communication is really the biggest thing that you can do. Communicate probably more frequently than you think you should, or even the smallest little things. I've found that there might be times where even if you're having a conversation, that they may or may not be listening, or you feel that way at times, but then you'll be in a conversation maybe with some other friends or out to dinner, and that thing that you thought they weren't listening about comes back up. So they were actually listening, and you just need to say it, right? Get it off your chest and not keep it bound in, right? You want to say it, and just know that they're, for the most part, they're always going to be listening. And then to have a little fun with it too, and plan maybe some trips. It doesn't always have to be the most expensive thing, but hiking's pretty cheap, or whatever it is that you like to do. Find that thing, and date nights or dinner or whatever, when you are together, and make that journey to be together. But when you are apart, I mean, communication is everything, in whatever ways that you want to make that happen. Email, text, FaceTime, they all matter.
Yeah, certainly. All right. Thank you so much for being so honest with us, Dillon. It's really, really appreciated. And thank you for sharing one more successful story. I hope this will be a big support, and this will inspire a lot of people to proceed with what they want to do in their life with their better halves in an LDR or not in LDR. So yeah, thank you so much for coming. So everything will be all right. And we'll see you, our listeners, in a month's time, as always. This is Long Distance Relationship Podcast, Long Distance Short. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Long Distance Short, GiftBasketsOverseas.com's podcast with real people in real long-distance relationships. Make sure to subscribe and keep tuning in for a new episode every month. If you have any questions or ideas for a future podcast, make sure to drop us a line at podcast@giftbaskets.com.